Hello, and welcome to Minnesota Homeownership Center's Welcome Home podcast. My name is Bill Gray, and today we're going to talk about the Homeownership Center's beneficial impact on the community during 2022. Joining me are Center President and my boss, Julie Gugin. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Bill.
And we also have Center Board Member and Associated Bank Community Accountability VP, Brian Crosby. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Okay, so every year we analyze the performance of our Homeownership Advisors Network, and we crunch the numbers illustrating our collective community impact. This information is always full of interesting data points, and it's been especially so since the rise and subsequent normalization of COVID. I don't know, is it too soon to say that? Anyways, hopefully. Here are some of the key takeaways from our work during 2022. So we served 11,229 homebuyer client households. Of those folks, 83% were prospective first-time homebuyers. 40% would be the first generation of their family to own their own home, and 85% had income at or below the area median income for their community of residents. So a lot of work helping people to get over that down payment hurdle. And 61% of those we worked with were households of color, another group often left behind when it comes to home ownership. On the foreclosure prevention side, we helped 858 households to successfully avoid foreclosure. Now that stat's always powerful to me because for each foreclosure prevented, we're helping to preserve a hard-won asset and maintaining stability for those involved, as well as for the entire community. So government stats on this put the amount of money saved from each foreclosure prevented. So that's the homeowner, the lender, the community at large, at around $80,000. So multiply that by 858, and you can see how impactful this foreclosure prevention work is for all of us. All right, let's turn to our guests. Brian, you donate your time and talent to this work as a Homeownership Center board member, and we thank you sincerely for that. What draws you to this work, and why do you do it?
Yeah, thanks, Bill and Julie, for having me. It's a pleasure to have this conversation. I think what really, well, I'll say a little bit about my position at the bank. So I'm a community accountability officer, and, titles only mean so much, but really what that means is my main role is to create and deepen partnerships that the bank has with nonprofit organizations and communities that we serve collectively. So we have a vision statement within my team, which is we uplift colleagues, customers, and communities by advocating for and holding Associated Bank accountable to our community commitment.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, that's what I try to do is, we make sure that the bank does what it says it's going to do. I would say for me, my personal, I'll say my professional commitment to the work. Obviously the center has been very flexible and very innovative in some of the programs and pathways to home ownership that you've been involved in. And that's work that directly aligns with what the bank is trying to do, because part of our community commitment is to invest $2.4 billion into the home ownership market, into down payment assistance for low, moderate income and communities of color. So that work aligns directly with what the work that the center is doing in the agency network as well, the advisor agency network. I would say for me personally, and why I stay connected to the center from a board capacity is really largely personal. I'm from the Twin Cities. I grew up here, and I remember being really proud of Minneapolis and being from Minneapolis when I was young. Cut away, I moved away for a long time and have come back, and now the stories of like racial disparities in almost every category is something that you hear. A lot of neighborhoods that I used to drive my bike through when I was younger don't look the same. There's not homeowners in those neighborhoods. Just things have changed a lot. Yeah. And for me personally, I want to be a part of the solutions that are happening, in and around the state of Minnesota to really help get people of color back on the right track here in Minnesota.
Right. No, I think that's great. A lot of that stuff kind of, it flies under the radar until it doesn't. And yeah, I know that there's a lot of momentum in trying to address some of these disparities that, we're calling out. The community's calling out. Well, thanks, Brian. Okay, let's turn to Julie. Let's talk about those service delivery numbers. So 83% are first-time buyers and 40% would be first-generation owners. The majority lower income and BIPOC. Our homeownership advising and education services are free and available to everyone. But why is it important to be seeing these kinds of numbers when we take a look under the hood, so to speak?
Yeah, good question, Bill. The Homeownership Center's mission has always focused on those households that face the greatest barriers to homeownership. And in Minnesota, that's households of color and lower income households. So we remain deeply committed to that work and that audience of potential buyers. We also acknowledge that part of the reason that this audience is so important for us is that historically, there have been intentional approaches to keeping lower income households and households of color out of homeownership.
Right.
Whether we talk about redlining, which was profligated by the federal government as well as state and local governments. Whether we talk about the demise of predominantly African-American communities through the construction of Highway 94 or Highway 35 or others so-called renewal projects. There have been any number of intentional deed restrictions as well, indicating who may or may not be able to own a particular piece of property or a particular home. So as I said, there were some very intentional, powerful practices put into place to keep people out of homeownership, and we're here to reverse those historical trends.
Right, right. And we talk about home ownership, but we're also talking about wealth building, and I don't want that to get lost sometimes when we have these conversations. Home ownership is something you can pursue if you decide you want to do it. Its benefit, in addition to that stability, for families and that kind of stuff, is the wealth building component. So I always think people self-select themselves out of home ownership because they think they can't afford it or the down payment's too high and that kind of stuff. The fact is, with a little help and guidance, we can help most people figure out how to become homeowners. Would you say that's correct?
I think that's true. I think part of our messaging and part of our outreach is creating the aspiration to recognize your family, my family, in home ownership and the option for home ownership. And with the right education from home ownership advisors, with the right down payment assistance, and there are down payment assistance programs available, like what Associated has and other lenders and community-based organizations, and with the right trusted advisors in your realtors and lenders and the right loan products, there are a lot of ways that we can help people empower themselves to create home ownership when it's ready for them and in a way that's affordable for their families.
Right, right. So it's a really good work, and it wouldn't be possible without our network of 35 different agencies having the advisors and educators embedded in those groups. Well, let's take a look at the data once more here, some year-over-year trends now. We're definitely still coming out of COVID, which turned everything, including homeownership, upside down. But here are some stats from 2022 that we can look at. Our classroom education, so that includes the homestretch classes, be they live or be they virtually live, posted a 16% increase over 2021 with 2,665 households served. This is the first year-over-year increase we've seen in the number of homestretch classes since 2015, when the availability of online homebuyer education began to eat into that figure. So that's interesting. Homebuyer advising fell 20% to 1,106 households served, but that's still above the number of households served before the pandemic began. And it probably has a lot to do with rising interest rates and continued inventory shortages. On the foreclosure side, the number of clients initiating services in 2002 increased 72% to 1,259 households, and we assisted 858 households in successfully avoiding foreclosure last year. That's up 84% from 2021, and the first increase there since 2018. Just a couple more numbers of interest here because they are interesting. In the public realm, pre-foreclosure notices, which are the proxy for mortgages in trouble, so to speak, rose 250% to 12,167 in 2022. Sheriff's sales, so that's when it actually does have a foreclosure happen, increased by nearly the same rate, moving from 712 in 2021 to 1,692 in 2022. Both of these figures are still below pre-COVID numbers, and the sheriff's sale increase is the first increase we've seen there since 2010. So more than a decade, and going all the way back to the housing bubble. Julie, what do you think these changes are telling us, especially that first increase in sheriff's sales since the housing bubble burst?
I think it's telling us that people are struggling to maintain their homes. We pay very close attention to that number. And during COVID, the number was, I think, more stable because of all of the government-backed programs that were available to help people stabilize or get caught up on their payments that they may have lapsed on due to COVID, whether it was their illness, a family member's illness, loss of a job, what have you. And now that many of those programs are over, I think people are starting to feel the pinch again. So it's very concerning and something that we'll watch very carefully. It's not enough just to purchase a home. We want folks to be able to sustain their home for the long run so that they can maintain that wealth generation.
That's how the wealth gets built. I should say, just to be clear here, first increase in sheriff's sales since 2010, but that's still only 6% of that number that was in 2010. So we're not headed back to that in any way. Well, thank you for that. There was one more takeaway, big takeaway in this report for me, and I want to see what Brian has to say about it. We track the median purchase price our buyers pay when they achieve ownership, and that fell from $204,500 to $184,000 this year. So that's a pretty big decrease. This was coupled with the average mortgage interest rate paid for folks that we worked with rising from 3.5% to 4.3%. To me, this is a clear illustration of the diminished purchasing power that comes into play when interest rates rise. This is showing that an average interest rate increase of less than 1% cuts buyer purchasing power by more than 11%. And given that rates have continued to rise since this data was collected, because this is 2022 data, this is probably going to get worse before it starts to get better. Brian, check my math here. Do interest rates really have such a dramatic negative effect on purchasing power?
Yeah, so I'm not a mathematician at all, but I'll say this for a little context first. Before I was in this role, I was working at a nonprofit, and I did a lot of work working directly with consumers to help build financial products for underbanked folks.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of time talking to people about their banking and their budgeting situations. And what I learned from that situation is sometimes those folks with lower incomes are really the better budgeters than most of us out there. They're getting themselves down to the end of the month with the money that they have, and there really just isn't much extra.
That's a good point, right?
So when interest rates rise, like in the environment we are today, I think I saw on the news today that we're highest interest rates in like 23 years or something like that. It really does matter. So, I mean, you can take, a $300,000 mortgage at, a 5% interest, which may cost about $1,700 a month, Whereas at a 7% interest rate, which we're kind of more at about now, and it's going to cost over $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And then you look at people who are already, getting
Right.
down to the end of the month with no extra dollars,
Right.
and you got to say, okay, now you need $300 more a month to stay in this home.
Right.
So it does have a real effect on people. I think, lots of the folks that we're trying to reach, kind of through the programs and the outreach that we do at the center, fall into this category where, a $300 increase in their mortgage could very well take them, out of the market.
Right. Right.
And I think that's what's important about the work that you do, is because, we do have a whole network of advisors that can sort of help navigate people through this process, help them to
Right.
understand some of the down payment assistance options, help them to understand what options might look like in a rising interest rate as well as a lower interest rate
Mhm.
environment, which could come as well. So I just think that that using the advisors is such an important part of this process for people, so that they can really get all the different information, all the different loan options, down
Right.
payment assistance, what post-purchase might look like once you get into a home, all those different things that we don't always think about when we're in the throes of actually trying to buy a home,
Right.
but how important those things really are.
Right.
So yep, the interest rate really does matter for folks, and I think the way that you can sort of bulletproof yourself against that is to make sure that you're working with
Yeah.
nonprofit
Yeah.
advisors who have training and lots of
Right.
experience on helping people kind of manage these different cycles within the financial
Right.
system.
So it's interesting. Obviously, not much refinancing going on now if you've got a
Not
3%
now.
mortgage from 3 or
Nope.
4 or 5 years ago. But the flip side of that is just because the rates are high today doesn't mean you should wait. You shouldn't try to time the market. And someone, and I can't remember who, made the comment that you marry the house and you're just dating the rate, which is interesting. And what that means is that you can change, when interest rates go down, if they go down, which, they probably will go down, but not necessarily to the
Where
level
we
that
were.
we
Yeah.
saw 5 years ago. You can refinance. Yeah, and again, an advisor can do a much better job of explaining to you that comment I just made. But the rate is it doesn't have to be permanent. You can refinance later on and not postpone your dream, so to speak. So that's great points. And I actually think that'll do it for this episode. So if you're interested in exploring home ownership for your own household, you can take a home buying class and enlist the help of a home ownership advisor for free by going to our website, hocmn.org. Our advisors and educators are embedded in organizations across the state, and they'll work with you to help you get mortgage ready, educate you on the buying process from A to Z, and walk with you through every step of the process. I want to thank our guests today, Julie and Brian. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. In closing, I want to acknowledge our sponsors, as always, Associated Bank. Thank you, Brian. Midwest One Bank, Bremer Bank, and Old National Bank. Our sincere thanks to each of these organizations for their support. That's it, and happy fall.